Northeastern. I think this is the 6th time. And Professor Whitfield, who's one of the nicest men that I've ever met in my travels. How many people know Professor Whitfield? He's just the sweetest man. You need to take his class. It's great. And I actually have presented at his class, but I think the last 5 semesters and counting, and I'm pretty sure he'll invite me back next time. So it is a great pleasure and privilege to be here. And we are going to have some fun this afternoon, but I like to begin every lecture I ever give around the world. Sometimes it can be an auditorium of 2,000 people, or it can be an audience of 20, with the same question. How many people have ever been to Bradford, Maine? Nobody. Okay. Well, as my grandmother would say, it's because you can't get there from here. Now, if you look at the Maine map, you'll see Portland and Bangor, and then go all the way up to Holton. But if you go northwest of Bangor, you see Bradford. And in the 1960s, when I was growing up, although that growing up part is still very much a work in progress. When I was growing up in the 1960s, everybody was a dairy farmer, and we grew all of our own food. And we played outside all day long. And even when we left the farm later on, my mother would send me outside with a brown paper bag and a canteen full of water, not a plastic cup or a plastic bottle. And she would say, be home by dinner time. And so I didn't want to relegate an old-fashioned outdoor childhood to memory. So we'll talk about some other motivations, but I want to take you to the front. Now, this is a camp in New Hampshire, the front lawn of a camp in New Hampshire. I've been going now, I think, 27 years. I either go Memorial Day, 4th of July, or Labor Day weekend. I try not to go 4th of July. I did when I was young because I would drink like a fish, and I would have enough alcohol that I didn't hear the fireworks going on all night long. So now I usually go Memorial Day or Labor Day, since I stopped the drinking part so much. 4th of July up there, there's lots and lots of fireworks. But the one common denominator is that all day long, because there's no internet, imagine that, there's no cell phone reception, no television set. So what do we do all day long? And we do this kind of thing. And that was a photo taken from last summer. And so the book is called Tag, Toss, and Run, 40 Long Games for Life. And the campaign is Long Games for Life, let's get kids back outside. And we'll talk about why this is important. But I want to take you back to the farm. In my background, people say, where are you from? I live in Rhode Island now, but really I'm from Maine through and through. That's me, a little towhead. That picture was taken in 1965. That's my grandfather, Henry Van Dyne. His claim to fame was that he was Dairyman of the Year for New England in 1970. Let me see. Now this is how we lived. We lived with something called the poop loop. Because I want you to understand another motivation of mine. Now the poop loop basically meant that we lived the manure cycle of life. People think you're dairy farmers, you spend all day milking. In fact, when you're a dairy farmer, you spend most of your day managing cow manure. You milk for an hour in the morning and an hour at night. The rest of the day, you're gathering up manure, you're putting it out on the fields to fertilize the crops so that you can grow more food for the animals or grow some food for ourselves. And my grandmother grew all of the food for all the farm hands, all the family, all the friends who stopped by, on a garden that was maybe 3 times the size of this room. It was remarkably small. It was a big garden for one woman to tend, but it was a remarkably small garden for the amount of people that it fed. And my grandmother grew all of that food, not with Miracle-Gro, not with something that she bought in the store, but she used cow manure as her fertilizer, and something else called, we'll call it manure tea since the camera's going. Right? Can you say cow shit on your censored? Okay, well, you might have to bleep that. But she made a tea out of that. And so basically how she did this, I'll give you a little visual. My grandmother she practiced the Pentecost religion. And I don't know if it's still true in Pentecost religion, but according to that religion in the 60s at least, women were supposed to look like women at all times. So a lot of you would fail miserably because you're wearing pants right now, or shorts. So you weren't allowed to do that in this religion. My grandmother could be mucking out behind cow stalls, or she could be throwing bales of hay on the wagon working beside the men, and she would have a flowery print dress and nylons on. And my grandmother was what we might call a busy bee, so she was always moving quickly. You know, waste not, want none, and all those kinds of cliches that we have. Well, my grandmother lived those realities, and she wore those nylons until they were absolutely threadbare because she was frugal by necessity and by nature. So she'd be flitting about the kitchen, and she'd catch the nylons on a table or something, and she'd dribble off like this and hand her lint pantyhose to me. And it would be my job to go to the cow manure pile. And I learned the difference at a very young age between the green, slimy stuff at the top and the dry, brown stuff around the edges. And I would begin to stuff the nylons full of the dry cow manure. And if I get to a really big hole, you're really grossed out about this, I can see, right? It's really So I would stuff those nylons full of the manure. If I get to a big hole, I would tie it off. And when I was done, it looked like one of those balloons that they tie for kids at the fair, except it was full of manure. Anybody know what I did next?
Put it in a tub of water.
This woman's tracking with me all the way. Are you from a farm? Are you from a farm, a farming background?
No, but we used cow manure and chicken manure.
Okay, well she's exactly right. We had a rain barrel that we gathered all of the downspouts for the house, flowed into this rain barrel. My grandfather didn't want to waste anything. And then we put the manure in the rain barrel, and it would be my job to stir that around. And at the end of 7 to 10 days, my grandmother would walk over and she'd give it a good sniff and she'd declare the manure tea to be done. And then it would be my job to take the watering can and go up and down the rows of the vegetables. And she'd always be right behind me saying, get the tops of the leaves and the bottoms of the leaves. And I'd always protest, why do I have to do this, Grammy? Because I thought Bradford, Maine was the black fly capital of North America back in the 60s, and it was miserable. She always said the same thing, because it keeps the bad bugs away and invites the good bugs in. Now, in my so-called day job as the founder of the Safe Lawns Foundation, I go around lecturing people about not using toxic products, whether they're fertilizers that leach off into the ocean or fresh water, or they're pesticides, weed killers, insect killers, fungicides, that we put down for aesthetic purposes on landscapes. And I coach people how not to do that, why not to do that. And my grandmother, back in the day, was doing all this stuff without any of that stuff. She had a beautiful lawn, she had a beautiful flower garden, and she grew all of the food for everybody who came by. But by March and April, the candy cupboard and the freezer were getting pretty threadbare. So what do you suppose we ate? Anybody know? We ate the lawn. We ate the lawn. My grandmother would go out and she would dig up all the dandelions on her lawn, and she'd go door to door to door on Reeves Road in Bradford, Maine, and she would ask those folks if she could dig up their dandelions. And she ate the plantain, and she ate the chickweed, and the little wild strawberries that came up in June that I was out there gathering. And we gathered fiddleheads by the brook. And so nature was a salad bar, especially the lawn was a salad bar. So when you're looking at this picture of the cows, I want you to think about what we call the poop loop. Because how does that fertilizer, how does cow manure grow things? When I speak to schools, I do that a lot around the country. I ask the kids a question: how do trees grow really tall in the forest? How does that happen? And you get some great answers from kids. But the reality is, if we let the pine needles fall to the ground, if we let the leaves fall to the ground, and we don't rake them up maniacally and put them in a plastic bag by the side of the road to be added to the landfill, then all of those pine needles and leaves become fertilizer that make that incremental tree growth possible year after year. So the tree basically grows its own food with the sun's help. Remember that from grade school botany, right? Well, we have gotten away from that in this country, where we put down chemical fertilizers and pesticides that take away the soil's own ability to grow things. Now, the soil has its own poop loop. If the worms eat things and digest things and excrete things, that's how natural fertilization happens. It's called mineralization. But basically the message is that if you want to be successful in lawn care and gardening and do this sustainably for the planet's sake, then you have to understand that the soil has the same exact needs that we all do, to eat and drink and breathe. When it digests the food and excretes the food, that's how natural fertilization happens. That's how the poop loop works. And you say, what the heck does this have to do with lawn games? And we'll get to that. That's my grandmother spreading cow manure out on the field. That grosses the people in New York City out really badly. So I want to talk about that in the context of lawn games. And for me, going around the country for the last 17 years, part of my story is that I got out of the University of Maine in 1983 with a journalism degree. I covered the Red Sox, Celtics, Patriots, and Bruins for 9.5 years. It was a great career. At the ripe old age of 30, I left that business and I became a so-called professional landscaper, which basically meant that I could walk in a straight line behind a lot more kind of like Forrest Gump in the movie. You know, if you ever saw him on the red snapper. Then people started asking me this peculiar question: what are you going to do about my dandelions? So well, you can call my grandmother, she'll come pick them up and eat them for you. And I thought that was a rather flippant answer. I started going to the store. I started going to the store and buying something called weed and feed. fertilizer and weed killer all in one package, and made the lawns grow like crazy, so I could mow them more often. It killed the dandelions that people weren't happy to see on their lawns. And I made lots and lots and lots of money. My grandmother thought I was, why would you on earth, dear, would you ever kill a dandelion? And my family looked at me and said, well, I'm making a lot of money. So we did it. I wound up down here in the hospital with something called acute chemical sensitivity. The doctor said after me using those things for 4 years, he said, if you keep using all that stuff, you're going to wind up dead. So I've been on this crusade to talk about lawn chemicals. And then I look at public parks and playgrounds and little league fields. And you start to look at the way kids roll around on the grass. And you think about how some of that stuff can get absorbed through their skin, through their nostrils, through their eyes, they breathe it in. You live in neighborhoods where the spray trucks come, even if you don't spray yourself. So breeze is coming in your direction, then you're getting what we call a secondhand pesticide treatment, just like secondhand smoke. So the primary message is that. So let's not use this stuff. But then I started to think about, I've got young kids, I've got 27, 19, but I also have 5 and 2, making my own grandchildren, I call it. And my 2-year-old, before she could even speak, could take out my iPhone and turn it on and find her way to her favorite video games and great little drawing games on the iPhone or the iPad. And if I allow her to do it, her mom allows her to do it, she will stay attached like this, engaged with this video device for hours. And it's really easy as a parent because you're tired and you're cranky and you're busy. It's really easy to let the device be the babysitter. But what's happened is that we've got kids who are now addicted. And in fact, we've got adults that are addicted. It all started 40 years ago with Pong. So how many people remember Pong? Anybody? All it was 2 little blips on your television set, usually black and white television set. Boop, boop. Big stuff. It was very exciting stuff. For a kid who grew up in Bradford, Maine, we didn't have a television until I was 6 years old. We had a telephone about the same time. It was a party line. So my grandmother spent half her day, holding the phone to her ear, listening to what Mrs. Stroud was saying, catching up with the town gossip. Some of you may remember those things. But 40 years later, we've got 1/3 of children ages 2 to 19 overweight or obese. 40 years ago, it was 1 in 20. Now it's 1 in 3 in 40 years. We've got ADHD affecting at least 1 in 6 children. We've got the impacts of obesity, diabetes, and all kinds of things that aren't great. And really what's happened in just 2 generations' time, and a lot of it has to do with that video games, is that kids spend 8 or 9 hours a day engaged with an electronic device. 60% of our schools don't even allow recess anymore. And kids today spend 70, and some people say 75 or 80% less time outside than their parents did. And so what is the cumulative effect of all that? And none of it's terribly positive. If you look at this photo taken in 1950, and you zoom in, you just don't see any kid there. All those kids, there's quite a few kids in that photo. You won't find a single kid in there overweight. And in fact, kids, by and large, were not overweight. People attribute obesity and stuff to genetics. It's really not. There are certainly some people who are going to be larger than others, and that's all true. But the flat-out obesity percentage, overweight, has risen. And this doesn't mean that they are bad people, not to point any fingers, but they're probably eating too much. But is even that their fault? Because this over-reliance on synthetic fertilizers and pesticides is rewiring our bodies, and it's exposing us to all kinds of things that make us way more susceptible to being obese. We have to eat 5 times as much food now as we did when I was a kid, to get the same amount of nutritional value out of the food, because we don't fertilize our fields with anything any good. We just put nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium down. So the cost associated with all this, none of it is terribly good. None of it is terribly uplifting. So I started to think about, watching my daughter saying, I can't relegate an old-fashioned outdoor childhood to memory. And I started to think about the games that we played. I met a woman who's actually spent a lot of her childhood in Maine, and she spent the rest of her childhood down here in Boston. Her name is Vicotria Rowell. She's an actress. She was on Diagnosis Murder and Young and the Restless. And we started reminiscing about all the games we played as kids growing up in Maine, and she heard down here, and we said, somebody needs to write a book about that. And so that's where the idea for Tag Toss Run. And some people say, well, this is a kid's book. Really, it's not a kid's book. It's a family book. I have been around the country in the last month since the book came out, and we've been doing these family lawn-a-thon festival, Lawn Games for Life festivals, and seeing the smiles on faces from different age groups is really great. Now, the government physicians in general recommend an hour a day of physical activity that's somewhat rigorous, moderate to rigorous. That doesn't mean you have to go out and do an hour of jumping jacks. That means you're going to get out and walk, do something. Only 50% of our kids are hitting the goal. Only 40% of our teenagers are hitting the goal. Now look at adults. It really drops off very, very, very quickly. I mean, it's really sad. Folks over the age of 60, we've got less than 3% of that age group actually getting out and getting the recommended amount of movement. But if you tell people to go outside and you send your kids outside of your parents and go outside and have fun, within 5 minutes they're going to tell you that they're bored. And so we need to give them something to do, and that's where the books, the games in the book come from. And we think there's a lot of benefits of outdoor play, and the sociologists and the physicians have well validated this. Obviously, exercising. Doctors will tell you that kids need, especially kids, but all of us need to be outside, moving around. When you go to a gym, we call it working out. That's that in its own term, working. That's a negative term. People don't like working. It should be called playing out. If you just go outside and play, we didn't have gyms in the 1960s. There was no such thing as a gym that you would go to for exercise. We would have thought that was really silly. My grandfather would be rolling around in his grave at the very thought of it. What, you need exercise? I'll give you something to do. The other thing that happens is appreciation of nature. When you have a group of children who grow up and they don't have any experience and affinity for outside and open spaces and open lawns and open woods, say there's one tract of land left in your town and it's 100 acres and a developer comes in and says, I want to put in a shopping mall. Well, if all you've done is live your life inside engaged with a device, and then your trip outside is to get in the car to go to the mall, then someone comes along and says, I'm going to build a new mall, you're probably going to think that's a really good idea, because you're not going to have an appreciation of nature. Conflict resolution. Once I had a little brother, he's a big brother now, he's 6'5" and 240. But when we were out on the playground, my mother sent us out there for hours at a time, and somebody slid into second base, and there was a debate on whether or not he was safe. You couldn't always end it this way. You had to resolve conflicts. You had to learn to take turns. Okay, I'll let you have this one, but next time there's a close call, I get the close call. We had to do captain first pick because there was no adult around to do a draft and tell us what team we were going to be on. So you had to learn all of those kinds of conflict resolution skills. There's a tremendous sense of community when you're a kid in a neighborhood going outside and playing, or even if you're building teamwork. And when I do colleges, things, you're having dorms play against each other, you build friendships and community. Appreciation of heritage and history. That was one of the fun things in the book, finding games from around the world that I didn't know about. Kubb, as your dean called it, Kubb. Kubb is actually from Norway. I'd never heard of it before. We've got that outside today. Mollky, my favorite game in the book, known as, we might call it Finnish Skittles. And it's a great game to teach addition skills, but it's a wonderful, it's just a wonderful game for all ages, for grandparents, for kids, and it's a very addictive game to play well. Truth is, if we talk a lot about kids and playing outside, but the truth is that some of these games are best enjoyed with an adult beverage, if that's your pleasure. It's a lot of fun. These are barbecue games. These are tailgate games. Last thing, reduction of ADHD and increase in learning capacity. There's loads and loads and loads of research that show that children and people of any age learn better by getting out of their chair, by getting away from their desk, and doing some fairly vigorous activity for at least part of the day. You come back and your brain is fired up on all cylinders, as opposed to just sitting still all day long. And this goes for folks of any age at all. So one of our goals in releasing this book is redefining play. We think play is on the left-hand photo, not necessarily on the right-hand photo. So the book, Media Tour, Family Festivals, and me being here today is all part of that, thanks to Ron Whitfield's suggestion that that might be a good idea. And I'm really looking forward to hope all of you come outside this afternoon and have some fun. We'll be there from 1:30 to 5, and I'm already sweating Real games, what I call the real games, instead of the video games. Cherokee marbles, double ball, Mexican kickball, lacrosse. These are all games that were played on this continent before any of our ancestors arrived. Are there any Native Americans? I shouldn't take that for granted. Europe and Asia, bocce, because a lot of people know bocce. There's Kubb, Mollky, Sipak, Takra. That we might call that kick volleyball. And if you've never tried that, that's a very challenging game. You should see some of the Asian champions, because that's where it comes from. Some of the Asian champions, they literally will, instead of spiking the ball like this, like we do at volleyball, they will spike the ball upside down with their foot on what they call a windmill kick. It's spectacular to watch. I'm hoping there's somebody on campus who walks by and says, yeah, I know that game. There's hide and seek, blind man's bluff, all those kinds of games. We're going to play blind man's bluff outside. That has been a great, out on the tour, great fun. Capture the flag, goes to the graveyard, kick the can. British Bulldogs, Red Rover, Fall, the Leader, London Bridge, and then the competitions, and we'll be doing some of those outside. Badminton, double dutch, dodgeball, kickball, sack races, scavenger hunts, all of these things, many of them don't require any apparatus at all. They're just good old-fashioned fun, and the smiles on people's faces are very exciting. As I alluded to earlier, another goal of this is to redefine the lawn for people, and quite frankly, to redefine the lawn for this campus. Your administrators spray on this campus. They spray to kill the dandelions that my grandmother used to eat. And I don't think that they should do that. I don't think public spaces should be allowed to do that. I want you to know that in Canada, a woman showed up at a town meeting in 1985 in the town of Hudson, Quebec, just to the west of Montreal. And she was a dermatologist, and she called it spring rash disorder. She wasn't sure what was causing it. And when people started spraying their weed, she would see folks show up with rashes from the knees down to their feet that she couldn't treat with anything. One woman came in particularly toxic. Her fingernails were falling out, her hair was falling out. She was very, very, very sick. She did the blood work, and what she found was that she'd been made ill by her husband's very liberal use of weed and feed. So she went on a personal one-woman crusade, and we showed the movie here. I made a documentary film about this woman called The Chemical Reaction, and we showed it here at Northeastern a couple of years ago. Now, due to this woman's instigation, you can't apply these products anywhere in Canada. Weed and feed, Roundup, products like that are off the table in Canada because the doctors have looked at these products and found them to be incredibly dangerous. Home Depot came out in 2008 and voluntarily said, we're not going to sell this stuff anymore. So I asked Home Depot in the United States, why are we still allowing that stuff to be sold here? And they said, because people still want to buy it, and the court said that we can't.
Where are they manufactured, the trees?
Excuse me?
Where are those chemicals manufactured?
All over the country.
All over the
I mean, people like Scott's Miracle Grow and Monsanto and those kinds of companies manufacture that stuff. So there's no one place that stuff is manufactured. So we want to take the United States, and that what happened in Canada. I want you to know that in New York, it's against the law to apply dandelion killer, weed killers around schools and daycare centers. Same thing in Connecticut, but it's legal in Massachusetts. We want to take people from this side of the fence, where the company shows up and they spray the lawn to get rid of all the dandelions, and they leave a sign that says, caution, warning, danger, keep off the grass. The kids are inside because he's trying to be a good dad and he doesn't want the kids outside on the grass. They're inside playing video games. Over here, the family is outside. They're organic. They care for their lawn and their landscape naturally. Their landscape is healthier. The trees are healthier. The soil is alive. Remember I talked to you about the soil being alive. So you look under a microscope or a magnifying glass and you're going to see all this cool stuff. Insects crawling around, and microscopic organisms like bacteria and protozoa and nematodes. All the stuff that's supposed to be in the soil. And then most importantly, we've got kids and dogs out there playing with the butterflies. So we want to redefine the lawn and make these surfaces safe for kids to play on and get away from what I call the moron approach, or the moron approach. It's one of those things, if you don't get it right now, you'll get it about 3 o'clock this afternoon. There's an entire $40 billion industry built up to put more stuff on our lawns. Anybody in the room old enough to remember the 1960s knows that we still played baseball, we still played football, we still played field hockey, and all of those kinds of games that kids play today, and we did it on surfaces that hadn't been sprayed with a thing. And this is a relatively new obsession that kicked off the second weekend of April of 1967. Anybody want to know what happens or remember What happens the second week of April every year?
Earth Day, is that?
Earth Day is April 22nd since 1970. 3 years before Earth Day, the Masters Golf Tournament was broadcast in full color for the first time. And for the men of America, that was like Dorothy Gale landing in Oz. They couldn't golf like Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus, but they wanted that emerald green fairway in their front lawn. And then the Red Sox games were full color, and the Yankees games were full color, and that's what everybody wanted. In an industry, this industry did not exist prior to 1967. It's literally the only industry that you can really point to one event where it just changed everything. And the companies, the chemical companies, promised to deliver a fairway front lawn. And we have unassailable evidence now that shows that this stuff is incredibly, incredibly toxic for kids and for pets. Come on, computer. There we go. Whoop. Okay, I just crashed my computer. Well, I don't know. Let's try this again. Okay. Go through these quickly. Not terribly graceful as a camera roll, but. So, almost there. Okay. Yeah. The next photo, if it does pop up, is probably what I call the most important photo, but maybe it just doesn't want to plug today. It's a photo of a little girl sitting on a lawn where there's a sign.
There it
Oh.
goes.
Well,
It's okay.
You saw it.
you saw it, you got a brief lift of it? Okay. It didn't want to play the last slide for some reason. So, the whole point of this is twofold, or there are 2 points I should say. One is, let's think about the surfaces that we play on. So, if you come out this afternoon and you're doing a wheelbarrow race, and you're laying down like this, and you're laying there like this, I want you to think about your kids and the kids that you might have someday, and how they're rolling around and they're getting all this stuff that's on there to begin with. They should be on the ground doing the wheelbarrow race. That's good for them. It's good for their minds and bodies. But we don't want them picking up substances that might be bad for them. And then in general, we want to get kids outside. I've had moms come up to me since I started this in the past month. It's really shocking. They say, I don't let my kids go outside. I don't dare to. I said, why not? I said, well, I just don't want them to catch anything or get bitten by anything. And you know, I'm just so afraid of bacteria that they might get their hands dirty. They might get their clothes dirty. And there was a campaign put out there by the Whisk laundry detergent company called America Needs Dirt. Because mothers today don't do anywhere near as much laundry per capita as they did a long time ago, because kids aren't getting dirty anymore. It's kind of a silly reason, but it was a good campaign, and a lot of good research came out of it that showed that we need to be talking about this, because what society might look like in 30 or 40 or 50 years if we have a generations more of children who just spend all their time inside, it's not going to be good based on what we've seen in the last 40 years. So on that somber note, I challenge all of you to come outside. There's tossing games if you don't want to run around. There are racing games, there are hitting games, and we're going to have a blast outside. And it's a privilege to be here today. I guess there's some books over there to sign, and I can take any questions now, if anybody has any comments.
What do you think we can do to get Northeastern to listen about not over landscaping so much? Especially since we're supposed to be this eco-friendly school that we really aren't.
I call it voting with your wallet, and let them know that you're the customer. You're the boss. And this is a for-profit enterprise. And tell them that as the customer, you don't want them using that stuff on the lawn. And there's unassailable evidence. There's an organization, if you want to write this down, called Beyond Pesticides, beyondpesticides.org. They have 335, I believe, peer-reviewed studies that show some kind of negative health impact from these kinds of pesticides. Again, pesticides is a blanket term for insect killers, fungicides, and weed killers. At safewants.org, which is my organization, we have something called a daily blog, and we do how-to information on there, but there's a lot of information on there with various studies linking to negative health outcomes. So really, anybody here has the right to call it and say, we're not comfortable with this. And if they tell you it's safe, think about this. Any product in this country that requires an EPA label, and it says caution, warning, danger, keep out of the reach of children, that label is on there because it is inherently dangerous. People think that the EPA approves it, therefore it's safe. In fact, it's just the opposite. There is a classification of chemical fertilizer and pesticide products called 25B exempt. Those things are fundamentally safe products that don't require a label. But if it's got a label on there that says caution, warning, danger, ask the administration, how is that even possible to keep it out of the reach of all of us if you're putting it on the lawns that we're sitting on? I mean, even before we got there today and started putting the games out, there were, you know, girls and guys hanging out in short pants and a couple of bikinis just rolling around in the grass out there. That's what they should be doing. That's exactly what they should be doing, and they shouldn't have to worry about that stuff.
So, curious, do you know in a positive way that there are specific chemicals being used at all? And I ask that because a couple of weeks ago I went out the front door of this building and smelled strong smell of fish. And I thought that it was coming from our planters in the library's porch. I thought, oh, that's interesting, they must be using fish emulsion. So, and I know that the university has put quite a bit of effort into becoming sustainable, so I really would be curious to know, what specifically is being used and what, where kind of know that?
You know, I have not seen a list of substances, except I have been told that there is, and certainly visually, what I'm seeing on some of the grass that's completely devoid of weeds. Something is being sprayed there. And certainly not in every, I've seen areas of the campus where there's nothing being sprayed either. But I've been told that there is spraying going on here, and I've been told that certain people are very irritated that I give this message out. So,
Well, okay, so one thing that people can do is if you know what's being, if you find out what's being sprayed, is to ask for a material safety data sheet from SDS.
yes. Yep. Material safety data sheet
Yep.
is the label. It's an extension of the label on the package. You have every right to look at that and see what it tells you. And some of that stuff will be very sobering when you look at it.
As a former spray user, which I stopped when I realized it was going to my yard, what's going to be our Rachel Carson moment here? I mean, it's heartening to hear that this woman in Canada got some traction, but there's no traction here. I mean, what is...
Well, I wouldn't say there's no traction. In fact, I probably wouldn't be here today. I would have given up by now if I didn't feel like we were making incremental progress.
No, I didn't mean it that way, but you go to Home Depot and it's a very big aisle with lots of bottles of labels.
However, Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, even Scott's Miracle Grow, which is the world's worst purveyor of this stuff, has started to offer some natural alternatives. And there's a lot more research dollars starting to go into that direction. So I believe that we will look back on what happened in Canada as a seminal moment, because it is beginning to trickle down here. People like me being loudmouths are trying to help that process. And why am I here today? I always call it recruiting missions. Because if you all leave here today and go talk to some people, whether you agree with me or not, let's have a conversation about this. Do you really need to, have dandelions ever hurt anybody? I should rephrase it. And the answer is no, they haven't. I mean, common sense, a lot of this is just common sense. Northeastern University was here before 1967. Kids were laying out on the quad in 1965, I guarantee, and having a good time and playing games. And so this has all been set up just for someone to make money. And I don't go around the country trying to put anybody out of business, but because there's money to be made making landscapes beautiful naturally as well. And I do consultations with companies and universities and municipalities all over North America. So I'm not saying you need to go ugly and let the whole quad become dandelions, because that may be the administration's answer. Well, we have a beautiful campus, and we've got a reputation to uphold, and that reputation is tied to the appearance of our grass. And I've heard that argument in very serious face, and say, well, okay, here's how you do it. Think about it this way. Why do you have mostly dandelions, if in fact you do? It's because your soil wants to grow dandelions and not grass. Weeds are messengers sent by Mother Nature to tell us something about the soil below. And we can kill the messenger any way we want to. Hot water, or torch it, or spray a chemical on it, or God forbid, bend over and pull it out like my grandmother did, right? But the fact is they're going to keep growing back until we change the soil conditions. And that's not difficult to do. You just have to think a little bit differently. And I'm sure there's enough brain power around Northeastern to figure that out. Or maybe not. Yeah. Hey, there he is. Northeastern's nicest man. Hey, Ron. This is Ron Whitfield. Ron is the reason I'm here. Everybody give Ron a big hand.
Oh,
Looking forward to all of it.
I had class, so I'm sorry I'm late.
Well, you're just coming in for the end. We're doing question and answer right now.
Excellent.
Ron puts me in front of his class to give their spiel every year, and the students are graded on the quality of their questions. And I can tell you, it's really fun, extraordinary, actually. Anybody else? Go eat some sandwiches and go play some games. And I will, like I said, there's some books over there if anybody wants one. They're
Got great weather.
$14.95. Oh, awesome. You gonna come out and play with us?
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you.